Okay, hi there, fellow knife makers. I just wanted to do a more detailed tutorial on how to peen a slip joint. I've had a few questions with regards to how to peen, and I know I've done a relatively brief overview on how to peen. This is a Barlow slip joint that I've just kind of completed and got ready for peening, and I just want to maybe give a little bit more of a detailed overview. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to the order in which we're going to peen is we're going to start with the pivot and having this pin in place as well, so that the space between the liners are kept consistent. And that pin, the middle pin, is the pin that we won't have in, because we don't want this pivot under tension when we are peening. So what we'll do is we'll put this pin in. I'll have a pin maybe that length or just a little bit shorter than that, and I'll start peening that area there. I'll have it almost exactly like that, so the pin will be above the pivot point. So just to go through some of the sort of the technical points of the actual peening when you're hitting the hammer against the pin, you would use a ball and peen hammer, a fairly light one. Don't use a big one because this is a delicate process. And what you want to do is you want to start with a flat head pin. This one has still got a bit of a chamfer on because this is what I was using just to put it together, but I would make that a flat head to start with, flat, okay? And then you would peen around. So you'd peen with the hammer on the side, you'd peen around like that, hitting it at an angle like that. As you go around, you move around and then you'd hit on top. So you try and get a very even mushroom shape on the top of that pin. So you'd go around the circumference and then on the top, and you continue that process until you've built up a little bit of a mushroom. This obviously is being supported on a little anvil or a piece of steel or a vise that's not giving way, and you build up a nice little mushroom point around the side. So when I've built up that mushroom around the side, what we then do is I put this on a bench that's got a hole in it, something like that, but a tiny little hole, and then I hit this area down with a hammer. So I'll hit it down so that the pin then moves down. I can move it down a little bit with my finger, but then the mushroom comes right up against the chamfered edge, and I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So I'll hit that down relatively hard, firmly, should I say, that it makes very, very good contact, and then there's a mushroom. Then what I'll do is flip it over, and I would first cut this off with a sort of a special pliers that can cut this type of thing, because a normal pliers you'll really battle with your battle to cut it. And then I'll grind this down with a relatively coarse belt down to 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeters above the surface, because that's about as far as I want to go before I start peening this end down. So essentially this is what you want the hole to look like. So you'd obviously have the 2.4 millimeter drilled hole through your scale, and then just before you start peening peening the knife together, on every hole you do this little chamfer. It's about a 10-degree chamfer. I've got a little tool that I made that does this, and you go down about 1 millimeter. So it's about from there to there is 1 millimeter. So let me put that in there, 1 millimeter. And you'd let that chamfered edge go down to over there. When your pin is in, obviously this allows for a mechanical fit. So when you are peening your pin, the pin expands into those areas and keeps this keeps the knife together. So again, what you do on the second time you peen, you've now flipped the knife over, you start peening around the edges. So you'd peen, 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 and that will build up this mushroom shape. And then you'd hit on the top and then peen around again, and you go in that until you fill this area. You'll essentially end up with something that looks like that, or maybe even a little bit less, maybe like that, where it's filled this area completely. This area over here is filled completely with material. You can then work down that little mushroom head at a later stage. Now when you're putting this pivot together, let me just get this back here. When you're putting this together, so you've peened the first side, hit it down with the hammer, flipped it over, ground that down to 1 millimeter above there, and then peened that side down. You're constantly checking. Obviously the center pin would not be in here. I'm not too sure I'll be able to remove this with my hand now. Let me just see if I can pull it out. There we go. So you'd constantly be checking. Just hang on, bud. Just stay to the side there, thanks. You'd constantly be checking if you're getting this play. So you never ever want to peen this thing so tight that you don't have any movement on you, or you're battling to move it, because right now the spring is only being held by the back spring. So this should pivot relatively freely, and that's all about the bush. The thickness of the bush that you got running in your pivot. So it's important that you continue you're able to move this thing freely. There might be a little bit of resistance, but nothing more. Otherwise what you're going to get is you're going to jam this knife up, that the action is, you're not going to have a good action on the knife, and that makes a huge difference at the end of the day for the consumer or the end user. You don't want a knife that you've got to battle and then it kind of just funks very slowly into position, and then you close it and then it stops over there, and then you've got to kind of push it down. You don't want that at all. So, and that is all about pivot thickness and pivot diameter, and we can talk about that at a later stage. But so we've pinned here and we've pinned over here now. So the peening is nice and tight. This knife is secure. It's been peened. There's a little mushroom there and a little mushroom there. I've gone back and I've peened this side again, peened around and down. This side, peened around and down. And I should be able to still have movement this way, but no side to side movement. So with this one, I've got a tiny bit of side to side movement because I don't have the pressure of the pin that's pushing down against the scales now. So there's a little bit of movement, but as I peen this, that'll tighten this whole joint up, that I'll get no side to side movement here. Little wiggle there. That should be nice and tight, but I should still have movement here. So I hope that's clear. Okay, so once you've got that pivot pin, which is the pivot peened, which is the most important in my mind, you then want to focus your attention on the back. So you again still are leaving that out. You don't want to enter that pin at all, and you start peening the back here. So again, you've chamfered the hole slightly, as I explained with the diagram. Let me just pull it back here. So you've chamfered the hole. Be very careful when you're using when you're chamfering on wood or any soft material, because that chamfer just drops very quickly into the holes. You don't want to over chamfer that area. So just chamfer it so that the chamfer's gone down about 1 millimeter, a little bit more maybe on the wood, and then the pin would be sort of maybe 5 millimeters above there. You start peening around and down and around so that you get a nice mushroom shape on that pin. Then you'd flip it around, you'd tap it down so that it's firmly against, once you've peened the first side, tap it down so that it's firmly against the material. You would then flip it over, grind it down. Now this is a mistake I've made. You try and cut the pin off as close as you can to where you want it, and then you grind it down the rest of the way that it's a 1 millimeter or so. Half the diameter of the pin is a good rule of thumb. So half the diameter of the pin, which in this case is a 2.4 pin, so it'll be 1.2 millimeters or approximately 1 millimeter still above the surface of the material. Be careful not to overheat the pin when you're grinding down, because sometimes what you do is as you're grinding it down you overheat the pin burns the material, especially if it's a wood or something like that. You'll see the burn. Even micarta, you'll see just around the pin you'll see a burn mark there. Okay, so we're about to peen the knife now. So what I've done is I've put the pin in the pivot, and that's the one I'm going to peen first. And then I've just got a placeholder here just to keep this rear part of the spring in position so that it keeps the scales nice and parallel. So I'm going to start peening the pin. You see there's still a bit of meat at the back there, so I just start peening around. It's just starting to mushroom slightly on the top of that pin, and we're going to carry on going. Okay, that's got quite a nice mushroom there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now tap that pin right through there and tap it quite hard down. So let's go to, I usually find a little hole here in my desk, like over there, and then I tap. So it's quite firmly secured now. So I know that the near side, which is this side over here, is going to be looking good. And I've closed all the gaps there. So yeah, I'm happy with that. Now flip it. I work that side of the pin down to about 1 millimeter above the surface, and then I peen that over, constantly checking like this that I've still got good play. Okay, so now I've got this side pushed down nicely, and this one is now been ground down, and I'm going to start peening that one around now. Just keep checking to make sure that the play is good. I've still got quite a bit of play, so I know that I can go quite a bit further down. Okay, so I'm happy with that. This pin has been, the pivot pin has been peened both sides. I'm happy there's a nice mushroom on each side here that I can work down later. This is the second pin that I'm going to peen, so I'll start on the near side. I'm going to mushroom that around, push it through, tap it down, flip it over, grind that part down to 1 millimeter above the surface of the scale, and then peen that one over. So here we go. There's a nice little mushroom on the top there. So now what I'm going to do is tap that down. It'll close any gaps there, and then flip it, grind that down, and do the same process on that side. So let's just go to over there. There's my little hole. Good, I'm happy with that. I'm going to grind that down. Careful not to overheat the pin now, because you're going to burn the wood. Quickly get it down to the right little height above the scale, and then you peen that closed. Now we're going to peen the second part of the back pin. when you're pressing down on the anvil, so to speak, make sure that you push down on that pin. You want the pin to make contact. You don't want the handle to make contact and then you hit down, because you're going to dent your handle as well as you're going to push the pin out. You don't want to do that. Now with the last pin that goes in, obviously you're putting tension on the spring now. So you want to put a little bit of a taper. I put quite a nice taper on the pin so that when I push through, it gently will bend that spring into position. So what you do is you try and you stick it in. Oh, you stick it in from the back. Stick it in from the back, and then I will put pressure on this pin, on the spring, and at the same time try and push or tap that through. You've got to be careful here that you don't damage the pin as you're pushing it in, because sometimes it will slice a little piece of that. The sharp edge of the spring, the hole, will cut a little bit of that material off and then go between the spring and the liner and leave a little gap there. So you've got to be careful of that. So I'll try and put a little bit of pressure down here with my thumb and just get it through. It's almost there. There we go, we're pretty much through. I just want to tap it off screen there. There we go. So the pin is in. There's now tension on that blade. You can check your action, make sure you're happy with it. But at this point there's not too much you can do. So hopefully you've done this beforehand while the pins were still removable. But right now I'm going to grind that down with the grinder just to get a flat point, even a slight little taper towards that, and then I'll start peening it around. So there we are. I've ground that little point off now. Now it's ready for peening. Okay, so now we're going to start peening the final pin. Okay, I've got quite a nice mushroom on that point. I just want to make sure that the circumference of that flared pin is enough to cover the taper of the hole that I've put in the scale. So I'm just making sure that's the case, and then when I'm confident that is, I'll tap it down. And do the final side. So let's go down to there. So that's quite good. This I now take down to 1 millimeter above the surface and do the final pin. Then we've got to take off the little mushroom points and do the finishing on the handle, and then we're done. That's the knife sorted out. Okay, so this is the final pin, this final side of the pin. Be careful now, make sure you're resting it on the pin itself and not on the scale. I hope you can see. Let me just have a look. Yeah, you can kind of see what's going on there. And yeah, this is it. Don't rush it. This is you're on the final stretch now, so make sure it's right. check the action of the knife. You don't want to jam that spring up so that you're not satisfied with the action. So it's still fine, it's not jamming up at all. I'm happy with that, but I want to give it a few more taps to make sure that it's secured nicely. Okay, that's it guys. Now we've got to take the mushrooms off and finish the scales, and that's it. Just maybe fine tune the action, but I think we're fine now. That's starting to feel really, really good. Just off the bat, I mean, I've just put this thing, we still got the mushrooms on here, which we've got to work down. But just off the bat, I mean, the action is feeling really nice, maybe a little tight, but I think it'll loosen up as we kind of use it a little bit, put a little bit of oil, lubrication on the pivot. But if I look at it, it's looking really centered, it's looking good. Everything has worked out very nice. The spring is flush, everything is looking really good on this knife, so it should turn out to be a fantastic knife. Thanks for watching guys. So I've just taken the little mushrooms down on the grinder very roughly, but fairly close to the surface, and I think from here we'll be able to work it down on the platen, the rotating disc sander, and yeah, we're pretty much close to finished on this one.